Influence is about making change and being effective at making change and being persistent with it.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, a friend of mine, Jonathan Adkins, CEO of the Governor's Highway Safety Association, the national nonprofit representing state highway safety agencies on the front lines of saving lives on America's roads. Now, before we dive in, here are just a few things I think you should know about today's guest. First, Jonathan has spent more than 2 decades helping shape the nation's approach to highway safety. Over the years, he has helped expand GHSA's reach, strengthening member services and supporting states as they implement highway safety plans and steward critical federal safety funding. Second, he is a trusted voice at the intersection, and you'll see later why I'm emphasizing that word, of policy practice and public awareness. As GHSA's chief liaison to federal agencies, he regularly represents the state's perspectives on Capitol Hill and in the media. But what makes his leadership especially compelling is his ability to translate a complex technical issue into something people can actually understand and act on. He helps connect the policy conversation in Washington to the everyday reality of safer roads, stronger communities, and lives saved. And finally, he knows how to turn conversation into collaboration. Jonathan has built strategic partnerships across sectors, and he also hosts GHSA's podcast, The Intersection, where he brings together influential leaders to explore big issues through the lens of roadway safety. That makes him not just an advocate, but a convener, someone who creates space for dialogue, common ground, and action on challenges that affect every American. Jonathan, you have been called a trusted voice on highway safety, a bridge between policy and practice, and a leader who turns conversation into action, as well as podcast host and, of course, CEO. Well, today we're thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome.
Glad to be here. This is fun.
It is fun, and it's always fun when I get to interview somebody I know, and then I get to kind of dig in and learn, more about them in a different dimension. And to start, Jonathan, for listeners who may not know GHSA or follow roadway safety issues closely, what is the Governor's Highway Safety Association, and why should the average American care about this issue?
Well, we should all care because we all use the roads. And unfortunately, about 105 people across the United States die every day in traffic crashes. So think about your own journey. We all we drive, we wheel, we walk, we ride, and that's dangerous, and we all have passion for it. And so the Governor's Highway Safety Association's mission is to get to zero deaths. These are all things that are preventable. Think about drunk driving. Think about distracted driving. These are not things that just randomly happen that we don't have control over. So we work primarily with state governments and territorial governments, but we also have about 200 private sector members, companies in insurance, autonomous vehicles, tech companies. And so we bring people together, we collaborate and partner together to reduce traffic deaths. And fortunately, we've had a lot of success. We're still losing too many people, but traffic deaths are down the last couple of years. So we're really excited about that.
That's good to know that they're down. When you say 105 a day, just right out of the gate, as a communicator, it's like, that hits you and you realize, wow, this is a really big issue. And that's something that strikes me about your approach. You got right to the issue and said something memorable there. You have a podcast, you're out communicating, and people may or may not know this about you, but you came up through communications. You're someone who was in a communications role who rose to become CEO. And that is not super common in my experience. And I wonder if you could talk about how that background has shaped the way that you lead, and why do you think communication should be at the table from the very beginning rather than just brought in at the very end?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it because I don't want it to be so rare. I think communicators make really good leaders for a lot of reasons. And you make the point that, and I've seen this in so many organizations where a decision is made And then they say, let's bring comms in to implement it or tell people about it. Comms
Yeah.
has to be in every decision at the beginning. My chief communications officer is one of my trusted advisors. She's in every conversation, every decision before a decision is made. And so thinking about traffic safety, it sounds complex. We're talking about Congress. We're talking about federal dollars. We're talking about federal agencies, but it's really about 105 people dying every year. And we're not communicating that topic, and we're not bringing it home to people. These are people that just get up like you and I do, Anthony, and we walk to work and we get killed. Just taking a walk or walking our
Yeah.
dog or taking a bike ride or wheeling ourselves to the drugstore. It's outrageous that 105 people are dying a day because of that. Just being out and about.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I think that's pretty cool about what you've done over your leadership role is you talk about how this is a big issue that we all have to come together to deal with. It can't just be the government, it can't just be companies. And you've really expanded the tent and brought so many more technology companies in to work on this issue. Can you sort of talk about that? And especially from a communication standpoint, what you have to do to communicate to get different partners who maybe weren't already part of your work to come together and find ways to collaborate with you.
I mean, we're somewhat fortunate in that roadway safety does impact everyone, and so it's making the case to people that this is why you should care about this. This device has gotten into a lot of problems for us in
Mhm.
roadway safety, but technology can also help us get out of some of those problems as well. And there are all sorts of different things that can alleviate the problem. And you're talking to employers as an example. What's the most dangerous part of your workday? It's that commute into work. And so working with fleets, working with companies like Amazon who have literally a ton of employees out on the road making deliveries every day, it's a natural fit. And so by working with companies like Amazon, or we work very closely with Uber and Lyft, we hope that those safe driving behaviors at work will continue into the off hours. So for that ride sharing driver that is working 9 hours a day on Uber or Lyft, when they go home, we hope that safe behavior will continue. And there's some evidence that does happen. And so I think everyone should be a partner in roadway safety. And so not just thinking about the typical people, like, that small list of people that you always work with, like think about how to broaden that mission and broaden what partnership means. It doesn't just have to mean funding. It can mean social media, people who have big platforms, influencers. We think of partnership in a lot of different ways.
I love that. You know, um, for listeners of our show, they know that we have a huge, diverse range of different guests that come on with different perspectives. What they may not know is that every once in a while, we get the opportunity to bring some of them together in person. And when you were on our docket, but before we scheduled this actual interview, you were part of a special chief influencer dinner that we did. It was hosted by Ambassador Sparber from Liechtenstein. And it was really great conversation. And one of the things that I remember you talking about at this dinner discussing influence was how we can't just build influence. We have to ask, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to put that into action? How do you decide where to spend your own influence, your own political capital, especially when, you can't fight every single battle?
So you have to pick and choose. And I think about, the Mel Robbins Lethem theory. There are certain people in roadway safety in our sphere, not them so much in our part of it, but people who are opposed to us, people that don't support drunk driving laws, that want to be able to text and drive. There are people that are, some libertarian organizations. I'm probably not going to reach them. And so to get up and get mad and say, I'm going to fight these groups every day, that's wasting my energy and that's wasting my influence. So I'm going to let them, but I'm going to focus on the 95% of the people that I can reach. But I'm going to be careful about that influence. I'm really going to be careful to make sure that I'm using it on something that's really going to make a difference. And I'll give you an example. We have a law now, was passed a few years ago, that's going to end drunk driving. The vehicle will eventually be allowed to will not operate rather unless you're sober. It'll be completely seamless. You'll turn your car on like you do now. Won't impact you at all as a driver unless you're drunk. If you're drunk, that vehicle's not going to operate. That's the law. in our country. Bipartisan law, both parties passed it, but it hasn't been implemented either at the end of the Biden administration or in the current Trump administration. So we need to get that law implemented. That will save about 10,000 lives a year. 10,000 lives a year. That's incredible. 10,000 families will not lose a loved one because of this. And so I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to use any influence I have. I talk about this every single time I can because nothing else I do is going to save more lives.
Tell me, I mean, that you mentioned sort of a policy challenge there where there's a law that's passed, but it hasn't been implemented yet. What does it take to keep momentum going on an issue like that, the impaired driving technology that you just shared, when the implementation is lagging? Like, how do you keep your coalition moving forward and keep that influence up? Because sometimes things can just fizzle out, right?
Yeah, I can use some of my influence on Capitol Hill and some other places, but what's really effective are people that have lost their lives, lost a lot of lives of loved ones.
Yeah.
So we used to call them victims, and we call them survivors now because they are survivor advocates. They have been through the most unimaginable loss. And having them go to Capitol Hill, having them go to federal agencies, having them go to the media, that makes a really big difference. And so part of my job and part of what motivates me every day is I want to get resources for them. I want to do everything I can to support them because that's ultimately what's going to help us end drunk driving and the traffic safety crisis that we continually are in. I think it is, we overuse the term crisis a lot, particularly in communications, but when you have 105 people dying every day, that needs some attention.
What have you learned about operating in what is a pretty polarized environment? I mean, even an issue like traffic safety that used to be one of those rare issues pretty much everybody agreed on, even it is more polarized than it used to be. Tell me about leadership during an environment of polarization.
I've learned to listen a lot more than speak and speak a little bit less. Just because I have a fancy title doesn't mean I have all the answers. I do come from a different background than a lot of other people do. I'll give you an example. Certainly the conversation we've had around traffic enforcement and race the last 5 or 6 years in the United States. We've done a lot of listening in traffic safety, worked a lot differently than we had in the past with certain communities, making sure that we're giving them the resources and the support that they need, and then it's not coming from top down. And so thinking about, I still say the word equity because I think it's really important. Just thinking about reaching people in different ways. It's very, very different than it was a few years ago. And that's because I think we're doing a better job at listening.
I've also heard you say words matter. You've also written it on LinkedIn. Can you talk about what you've learned about language and how that has evolved over time, especially when you're trying to bring people together across various divides?
I'll pick up on the word of equity, because I'm not afraid of the word, but it's not a word that I use a lot without explaining it. Because it is a polarized word. Equity to me in roadway safety means that it's our job to protect everyone, to make sure that resources get to everyone. I'm from a small rural state in West Virginia. Equity applies to a state like West Virginia because it is a poor state. It is a rural state. And we want to make sure that our resources are getting to everyone in the country, whether you're a big blue state or red state or rural state, regardless of your demographics. And so words do matter, but you also have to explain what exactly you're talking about. And in case of traffic safety, when you started explaining it, it becomes a lot less polarizing because traffic deaths don't discriminate. Doesn't matter if you're black or white or Democrat or Republican. We're all in the same situation. We're all in this together.
And that's kind of thinking about the message. Let's talk a little bit about the messenger. How do you know when you're the right person to carry the message as CEO, when somebody else is the right person to carry the message? You mentioned survivor advocates, for example. What have you learned, through your career as a communicator that you've brought into the role of CEO about who the messengers ought to be?
You have to have a lot of different messengers, and some of it will depend on the audience. But as a CEO or a leader in your organization, you can't have an ego. I hire the best people I can. I hire people that are smarter than I am, people who are better communicators than I am, because that makes the organization and that makes our efforts stronger. You can't be threatened by other people's success. And as an example, I think part of my job as a CEO is to make sure that I'm building my staff, giving them the opportunities they need to be either successful here, hopefully that they stay a long time, or to allow them to be successful somewhere else. And I've had both cases. I've had people, because I've given them a platform to go out and do that New York Times interview or to do that podcast. Others say, "Wow, that is a star. That person should be in leadership," and they've gone on to have really, really successful careers and to carry the water for traffic safety, whether it's at GHSA or other organizations. So can't have an ego in this work.
One of the things I know about your organization, because you have, so all of the states are your members, your constituents, in a way, that showing up in person is a big part of what you do, and doing that not just in Washington but across the United States. Talk a little bit about that, and talk about what that in-person element means in the digital age, and how you find ways to amplify what you're doing, and just your approach thinking about that, because obviously you can't be everywhere.
Can't be everywhere, but I think we over rotated the last few years, and everything was on Zoom. And I think you lose out on opportunities just to build relationships, not necessarily talk about policy, but just to build relationships where people understand where this person is coming from. You get to have some of those in-depth conversations, and so I can't be everywhere. Just as everyone else can't either. But I do try to pick and choose. I don't just go to San Diego in the spring because it's the time of year to go to San Diego. I've spoken in North Dakota's Highway Safety Conference a couple years ago. I try to make sure that I'm going to different places and in different members, but also giving my staff the opportunity to participate in different conferences. I think it's important, particularly as we think about mentoring younger staff, to understand what it's like to be in an in-office situation, what it's like to not just go to a conference and sit there, but go to a conference and be an active participant.
And I've noticed on your LinkedIn, for example, you sort of take content from when you're out and about. You're not sitting at a desk like you are when you're interviewing with me. You're often like walking down the street, talking about your role as a pedestrian, or you or other team members will have something sitting in a cart, not driving, of course, but safely. And you're sort of bringing a window into that outside experience, because, of course, the roads are what your work is all about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always thinking, right, and I'm always thinking about like how do we convey what traffic safety actually means, and just like you are, I'm a real person. I'm a policy person in traffic safety, but I walk a mile and a quarter every day to work. My joke is it's uphill both ways, but I'm a pedestrian. I'm out in the roads every day. I see what dangerous drivers are doing. I had way too many near misses in my own daily commute, and so being able to communicate that, people will say, "Oh, that guy's a CEO, but oh, he's actually a real person too," and it helps to make that connection. I've had a lot of companies and partners reach out to me just because they saw something I wrote on LinkedIn and they were like, it resonated for whatever reason. And so that's how you build relationships, and that's how you build converters, because we're really building a momentum, a movement rather, and with momentum and roadway safety. I need everybody to be on board. And every day that I get a few more people, that's making an impact.
You mentioned LinkedIn. We're both big fans of LinkedIn and its ability to, connect us with the right people and get the message out. When did that journey start? When did you, as a communicator turned CEO, say, hey, LinkedIn might be a platform that's, could be used beyond just being a Rolodex? Sort of walk us through that, because I think a lot of your peers might be just getting involved or thinking about the platform too. And, somebody like me can always tell them my opinion, but hearing it directly from another CEO, I think, just makes a big difference.
I think that just starting this conversation, I really enjoy it, first off. And so there are parts of all of our jobs that we don't enjoy as much. And so I think finding people, what are they comfortable with, right? You're not suddenly going to become, everyone is not suddenly going to become Anthony Shock on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Spending a lot of time reading other people's posts, supporting the work that other people do, get familiar with LinkedIn. But for me, I started becoming more active, I think, really with the polarization of some of the other platforms, wanting to stay off some of the political
Yeah.
stuff, for lack of a better term. But I put a lot out on LinkedIn, but I learn a heck of a lot. I learn what other people are thinking, what they're doing, what are some opportunities. I get to know people as real people. There's this debate about, should you put personal things on LinkedIn? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think you should be authentic. And if you want to put something on LinkedIn, it's your social media platform. Mel Robbins tells us all the time that social media isn't about the people that are going to be reading it or reacting. It's about what you want to share. And if somebody doesn't like that you shared your Halloween pictures with your kids on LinkedIn, guess what? They'll unfollow you, and that's okay. Let them.
I know you love the book, Let Them, and I love that you brought up Mel Robbins, and we'll make sure to include Mel Robbins in the show notes just so folks can find that because it's a great book and she just like shares so much great
But I've had
advice.
that even with my team. I really try to empower my team to post what they want on social media. And I've had a couple
Yeah.
people say, well, what if somebody thinks it's not appropriate? Again, using good judgment, but I said, let them unfollow you, let them follow somebody else. But I want to empower my own team to build their networks as they see fit,
Yeah.
because that will serve their careers well.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. Couple things you hit on that I want to underscore because I get to moderate a quarterly roundtable at LinkedIn's office here in DC in my role with National Digital Roundtable. And a couple things that I just hear and see repeatedly that you underlined is number one, if you just go on LinkedIn to push your message out, you're missing the whole huge opportunity to listen, to learn, to get that intelligence, to see what others are doing. And I think having somebody hear that from you, if you're just having your team do all this on your behalf, you can't have that listening component, right? Because you're not on there. You're just giving people stuff to post for you. Not that you can't get any help, but let's just talk about that for a second. Tell me a little bit more about why that's important for you. And just even how you as a busy CEO have time, are you doing this when you're, at the airport on your phone? Are you doing it at your desk? You have a time in the morning? Just a little bit more of the mechanics of the listening and why it's important.
So, I mean, I am fortunate as CEO. I do have some teammates that help me with my LinkedIn, but about probably 3/4 of my posts are things that I've written myself and I'm editing myself. I think that's important to, again, being authentic. I look at everything before it goes out, if it's a GHSA post. But again, I enjoy doing this. And so this is not a heavy lift for me. It's sort of how I get my news to start the day. I'm literally scrolling on LinkedIn as I'm eating breakfast in the morning. I want to see what opportunities are out there. I also want to have the opportunity to congratulate other people. And I'm not talking about people who just give us a check or other CEOs. I really try to encourage people who are survivor advocates. Maybe they lost a child to drunk driving death. They didn't sign up for this. I'm a CEO. I get a nice check every month. I volunteered for this job. People, and a lot of people we're working with, they didn't volunteer for this. They got pulled into this. And so I try to highlight their work, give them a quick comment, but also junior staff in our other highway safety offices. They like hearing from a CEO, to have a CEO or a head of GHSA say, hey, that was a really interesting post, or I watched your webinar, or went to a session that you moderated. I really try to make that effort to empower folks to be like, wow, somebody else is actually noticing what I'm doing. And maybe that will encourage them to stay in the field or put a few extra hours in because they see that it's making a difference.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I want to just reflect on another episode we had. We interviewed Steve Taylor, CEO of the Arthritis Foundation. And I'll never forget, he said, when I joined Arthritis Foundation and became CEO, first thing I did was I moved my office to be more central in the building and had the door open because I wanted to show that I had a really, open and accessible leadership approach and have that culture. He said, but I also started spending 5 to 10 minutes a day on LinkedIn, focused on what my own team members were saying and liking and commenting and engaging with them there. And he said, if other CEOs say, well, how do you have time for that? I say, how do I not have time for it? It's the digital water cooler. It lets me complement what I have just only so much time to do in person, and which he values, but it lets me do it online. And I think hearing from you, reflecting that, congratulating people, not just the funders and partners, but also, somebody who works in a state office, for example, that really helps to build up those relationships and that connective tissue. And when you build those relationships, it really gives you the ability to influence even more, but you have to be involved and roll up your sleeves at some level to be able to do that.
And it has to be authentic, right? It has to be, you have to show your true self. And that makes us a little bit vulnerable. But that's where the part we can't worry about what other people are going to react to and how they're going to feel. This
Yeah.
is really about how are we empowering ourselves as leaders and how are we empowering our teams and our constituents. We can't be so afraid that we're going to offend someone or someone's
Yeah.
going to say, why did he put his Halloween pictures up of his kids? Why not?
And I want to hit a point on that too. One of the things I've heard a lot in these, roundtables that we do with LinkedIn is some leaders are just, they don't want to be super self-promotional, or they don't necessarily want to, expose every single thing about their personal life. And so then they just sort of are reluctant to do anything, or they just, are sharing press releases. And what I've heard is, we kind of have to find that zone of authenticity that works for us. And by the nature of what authenticity is, it's going to be different for each one of us, right? Because that's the whole idea of authenticity. I think of it sometimes as a Venn diagram of your professional brand and your personal brand, and where do those two overlap with one another? And I'd like to maybe have you talk a bit about how you decide what makes sense for LinkedIn versus maybe, what you would put on your personal Facebook or Instagram. For example, you walk to work, you talk about that. But, you also, of course, have things that you probably don't put there. So how did you as a leader navigate that? And is that a work in progress, or do you feel like you have a pretty good playbook about what makes sense to go on LinkedIn and what doesn't?
I think it's always a work in progress. I'm also at a point in my career. I'm a lot older than you are, and so I have more yesterdays in my career than I have probably tomorrows. And so for me, it's okay to be a little edgier, for lack of a better term, or to take maybe a few more risks. But again, everybody's going to find their own point of comfort, and the way that I do it isn't the model necessarily. It's the model for me, but finding your own level of comfort. I do think there's a good sort of rule of thumb of if you're not sure if you should post something, don't. Um,
Uh,
Come back to it later. I like that in LinkedIn you can schedule posts for later. Yeah. So to
you have
make
time
sure
to
that
change your mind on the post.
yeah, I mean, if you're not sure, the answer is probably no. Um, I post some personal things, but I don't post them all. I use that, more for maybe for Facebook or for my various tech streams and other things like that. But I also, Anthony, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about this. Maybe it's from
Yeah.
a point of confidence. I'm going to be authentic if I err. A little bit, that's okay. One of my staff, my comms team used to joke back in the days when Twitter was really popular that about once a year I would tweet something that I probably shouldn't have, and I'd get a phone call about it from somebody.
Yeah.
Again, it wasn't anything inappropriate or that's,
Yeah.
but things maybe they're just a little edgier around policy. And so that was sort of the joke of every about once a year I would tweet something that I probably shouldn't have. And so that's also thinking about the lesson. Like if you're not sure, let it sit for a minute. But don't overanalyze this as well. Like social media is social. It should be fun. It should be something you're excited to do in your job. And so I wouldn't overthink it too much.
And one of the things that, you've alluded to a little bit and that we've talked about is the importance of listening. And we, talked about that there with LinkedIn and in particular about how you can use it to sort of listen to what's happening. But we've also talked about it in terms of, inside your organization and across the country. Say a little bit more about how you think about listening and gathering information from stakeholders when that's an important input into how you influence not only them, but how you influence others on their behalf. Because I think that's something that a lot of folks are navigating. You sort of mentioned we went to a period of time when everything was on Zoom, probably oversampled in that area. That changed the way that we listen and show up. Okay, now things are bouncing back a little bit. But of course, we have a lot of technology that can enable us to listen and to organize data at scale. So love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
I mean, I think you simply have to ask, and it's not a high tech example, but we're putting together a members only luncheon at our annual meeting this year, something that we haven't done in the past. And we're going to put something on our listserv next week with a couple different options for folks to vote. People like to be asked what they think. If you're not listening, you're not asking questions. And so, I do that in person. I do that in social media. I do that via text. We joke a lot of times in articles about, some people say ignore the comments. I read all the comments if it's my own post, and I try to respond to them all. I get a lot of direct messages on LinkedIn. Most of them are supportive, but not all of them. People will see something and say, it's my right not to wear a motorcycle helmet, for example. It's a sort of a hot issue right now. People want to be able to ride their motorcycles without helmets. And so I get pushback on that. And I'm not going to spend a half an hour or half my day engaging on it, but I'm going to respond to every message at least once. Someone's taking the time to reach out to me. I'm going to listen to what they say, and I owe them a response. But part of being a good listener is you have to ask the right questions, and you have to ask good questions and be willing to take that feedback. I love an open-ended question. There's nothing worse than a yes or no. I want to think. So, what do you really think about that? What would you do if you were in my seat? What are we do? What are we not doing that we could be?
How do what type of, maybe an open-ended question is the answer there, but what do you say when somebody says, well, I don't think I should have to wear a helmet, when I ride my motorcycle? How do you approach something like that where they've maybe already made up their mind about that issue and you're at odds with them?
I listen to it, ask them why, and it's usually about personal freedom. And I give them a little bit what some of the research is. I usually try to give a quick story of somebody that I've met. Unfortunately, I have too many examples of people who've been severely injured or lost someone. And they say, we want you to have the freedom to be safe. And maybe we make some progress, maybe we don't, but it's a cordial conversation. And I always say, let's keep the dialogue open on both sides. And we may not agree today, but maybe down the line, or maybe when it becomes less about messaging the CEO of GHSA, maybe it'll be that person, when they're going out on a trip, they'll put the helmet on. Oh, I'm going to wear my damn helmet, fine. Because they remember, I want to be home for my loved ones. I try to make that case. It's not about me. It's not about the law. It's really about, getting home at night to your loved ones.
Yeah. And one of the things that you've kind of done in this conversation is sometimes you've leaned on stories, sometimes you've leaned on data. Like I still remember 105 deaths a day. Not too long ago, somebody said this line that I really liked, which is data makes us credible, but stories make us memorable. And I thought that was a really good line. I've been repeating it. You combine data and storytelling a lot. Is that something that you think about really intentionally for yourself and as an organization, or is that something that maybe just comes naturally? But especially since you have a communications background now as CEO, I'd love to hear kind of how that comes together for you.
I'm not a data person. I obviously know the data, but I am a storyteller. I'm a comms person at heart. And so those stories resonate. And a lot of times when I'm just meeting somebody, I'll ask them, like, do you know anyone who's been impacted by a traffic crash? The answer is almost always, unfortunately, yes. And so, well, what was that like? What was that like when you lost that friend in college, or whatever the case may be? And that turns it already to an issue of like, oh, I understand where you're coming from. And so those stories are really important. And that's what people remember. They might remember the 105 deaths a day number, but they're going to remember, oh, wow, that my friend I lost, or my neighbor who died, that didn't have to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're on a podcast today, of course, for Chief Influencer. You host your own podcast, The Intersection. And I wonder if you could just talk about why you decided you wanted to create a podcast for GHSA and, kind of where that came from, but also what interviewing other leaders has taught you about some of these things we've discussed today, communication and vulnerability, et cetera. So tell me about your own podcast host journey.
So being vulnerable and being very honest, I will tell you, I wanted to do it because I thought it'd be fun. And there's some other reasons, but I was like, I'm going to enjoy doing this because I want to reach people in different ways. I want them to see me maybe in a little bit different way and see my sort of whole self. But I think about people that are interesting, right? Who would I like to go to lunch with, and who would I like to have a cocktail or mocktail with? And so we just had Stacey Stewart, the CEO of Matt, on, and I've known her for a while, but we're just starting to get to know her. And I literally said, oh, we should go to lunch. You're kind of cool. And I said, before we do that, let's do it on the podcast, because I want to have that conversation. And it's not just tell me everything that you're doing. Talk to me about you as a person, you as a leader. What are your experiences? What motivates you? And so it's the kind of conversation I would have, again, if we were having a cocktail or a mocktail. And we've gotten really incredible responses. There's the continual joke that no one's on the street at night because everyone's home filming our podcast. But we've done 5 episodes so far, and we just had phenomenal response.
And say more about the response. Like, how do you know that this is working?
We know it's working because of storytelling and data points, tying into another conversation. We've had about 12,000 unique viewers over 5 podcasts. We're a really small organization. And so that's a big number for us. But every time I go somewhere, Anthony, someone comments on the podcast, and it's not necessarily the usual suspects. Maybe people I don't even know are saying, "Oh, I saw your podcast," or "I saw the YouTube short of it." I've had a lot of people ask to be guests. Um, and it's just been encouraging. I've had a few people make comments to me about my dog or some other things I've said on the podcast. And so they're getting to know me as a person, hopefully making me a little bit more accessible.
And I guess I'd love to hear your thoughts for leaders that might have an idea like this, but then they just sort of are like, "Oh, I don't know if it's the right thing." Did you approach this from like, "Hey, this is an experiment. I'm going to learn from it." Just taking the leap on something new, whether that's being more active on LinkedIn or whether that's launching a podcast.
All the above. Just try it. And I mean, we literally said we're going to do a podcast. We're going to do a couple episodes. That was the commitment. And
Yep.
so, try it out. If you enjoy it, keep going. But and if you don't, and if the numbers aren't right or it doesn't make business sense for you, there's no need to continue. But try things that are fun. LinkedIn, and for me, is somewhere again. I'm a communicator.
I see.
Lean into where you really want to go. And try something a little bit different. But again, it's not going to be for everybody.
And speaking of kind of trying different things, trying new things, one of the things that I've learned about you that I didn't know before this process, Jonathan, is that you serve on the board of YouthCast Media Group. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about that. But I'm also just curious, what have younger voices taught you about influence? And has that influenced you in terms of how you think about how GHSA reaches people?
Yeah, YouthCast Media Group is a phenomenal group, and our mission is to try to empower young journalists to tell stories via social media, via traditional media outlets. We've been in USA Today, or the youth have been in the Washington Blade, and it's primarily youth in underserved communities. And so this is an opportunity. I'm really learned, and I've listened. I can help them with organizational things about how to run a nonprofit, but my experiences as a 50-something white man are going to be very different than somebody from an underserved community. And so I learned a lot. And I'll tell you, the best thing about YouthCast Media Group is that the youth are incredible. If you feel at all concerned about the future or what the future of the country, the world looks like, get involved with a youth organization. I mean, these young people are sharp and smart and ready to lead. And the future looks really bright. Present could be a little bit questionable at times for all of us, but man, we've got some great people coming up.
Yeah, that is so true. I've had that experience as well. And I think that can be especially motivating when you work on an issue that, seems so big that it's like, how could we possibly solve it? Obviously traffic deaths in your case have been around for a really long time and, you've made some progress, but I'd love for you to just share as we kind of come toward a close here, a couple more questions, but just how you think about sustaining your own energy internally to continue the influence when an issue can seem like it's slow to change. It takes a lot of work to get a policy changed and then implemented, for example.
It's hard, frankly, in an area like roadway safety, because we know we're saving lives every day, but we don't know the person that we saved, right? We only know about the person that was in the traffic crash. And so part of my job is to motivate people by seeing the data, to thinking about law enforcement. We know how important law enforcement is in traffic safety. And so with all these traffic death numbers going down, I'm making sure that we're sharing that with our law enforcement partners, because the fact that they're out there, arresting drunk drivers, that's making a really big difference. Making sure that we're saying thank you, and make sure we're surrounding ourselves with survivor advocates, people who have been victims of traffic crashes, because that's incredibly motivating. That tells me, what, we've got to keep going. We will get there. It's just not going to be today, but it's hopefully going to be in our lifetime that we'll be at 0 deaths. We're very close.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as we come to a close here, Jonathan, I just want to ask you, when you hear the phrase chief influencer, what's that mean to you now? And how do you define influence today? Perhaps it's changed since, across your career when you were wearing a different hat as a communications person and not as the CEO.
I mean, influence is about making change and being effective at making change and being persistent with it. Learning how to listen so that people will listen to you when you speak. I'm an introvert by nature, right? You know, I'm a podcaster, I'm a CEO, I'm on LinkedIn all the time, but I'm not the loudest person in the room. And so I try to be really careful about what I say has impact, right? And so I try to catch myself, make sure that I'm not just being the loudest, but being the most effective. And that's really what being an influencer is about.
And, that theme came through, I think, so loud and clear in this conversation today. When we think about influence, it's not just influence for influence's sake, but it's about action. And we talked about influence on the inside, with your own partners and your own members and your own team. And I've seen firsthand how you being more active as a CEO on LinkedIn has kind of inspired your team members. They've led by your example, and you see them posting, in a car or on the road, again, not driving, but sitting in a car and talking about an issue, posting a video, and that content has really resonated with their followers as well. And so that influence on the inside has led to more influence on the outside. And ultimately, though, everything that you do, you always bring the messaging back very clear, as one would expect from a professional communicator, to the issue at hand, which is saving lives, identifying that problem really clearly with the data, and then telling stories that show how these are real people, human lives. And what I have really enjoyed observing about you is that then you showcase that through your own story, right? Whether that's walking to work or whether that's, sharing a book that you really like, but sort of humanizing that perspective that comes from the leader of an organization. So I really appreciate you making time, Jonathan, to be with us. And I encourage folks to check out Jonathan Adkins, CEO of the Governor's Highway Safety Association, on LinkedIn or what other platforms, and go check out GHSA's podcast, The Intersection. You heard that he just interviewed the CEO of MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and it's still a fairly new podcast, 5 episodes in. I have a few miles on you there, but I have a feeling you're going to keep the momentum up because you're doing a great job with it and you're reaching the people you need to. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Anthony. It was fun.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.